3 days after my husband threw me out with $43 and told me I was worthless, federal investigators were already building a case that would destroy everything he owned. The funny part, he didn't know it yet. For months, he secretly hunted a fortune he believed my late father had hidden. He tore apart our marriage trying to find it. What he never found was the forgotten bank card sitting in my suitcase and the $47 million attached to my name. At 6:14 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday, investigators walked into his company carrying search warrants. By the time he realized what was happening, his lenders were calling loans, his investors were running, and his future was measured in criminal charges instead of profits. He thought he had won our divorce. He thought he had broken me. This is the revenge story of how the worst week of my life became the beginning of his downfall. My name is Vivienne Ashford. Chapter 1. The teller looked at the card for less than 3 seconds before his expression changed. That was the moment my stomach dropped. I had walked into First Harbor Bank expecting embarrassment, not alarm. The plastic card I had handed across the counter looked ancient. The silver lettering had almost disappeared. The corners were worn smooth. It looked like something that should have been thrown away years ago. The man behind the desk glanced at the screen, then back at the card. His eyes narrowed. He typed something, stopped, typed again. Then he stood up. "Ma'am, would you mind waiting just a moment?" My throat tightened. "Is something wrong?" "Just one moment." He disappeared through a side door. I stood there clutching my purse while people moved through the lobby around me. A woman deposited a paycheck. A man argued quietly about mortgage paperwork. Somewhere a printer hummed. Everything felt normal except me. The teller returned with an older man in a dark suit. His nameplate read Harold Mercer. Harold looked at me carefully. "Miss Ashford?" "Yes." "Would you come with me, please?" 2 security officers appeared near the entrance. Not running, not rushing, just standing there, watching. I suddenly felt cold. "What is this about?" I asked. Harold offered a polite smile that somehow made me more nervous. "Please, this way." I followed him down a hallway into a private office. The moment the door closed behind us, every terrible possibility rushed through my mind. Maybe my father had hidden debt. Maybe the account was connected to fraud. Maybe someone had stolen my identity. Maybe I was about to learn something awful about the man I had spent my entire life loving. 3 days earlier, I thought my life could not get worse. I was wrong. 3 days earlier, my husband stood on the front porch of our house and told me to leave. Not our house, his house. At least that's how Nathaniel described it. The memories still felt unreal. I remember standing in the driveway with a single suitcase beside me while movers carried boxes through the front door. I remember staring at the flower beds I had planted with my own hands. I remember the curtains I picked, the kitchen I painted, the dining room where every Thanksgiving dinner had happened. None of it mattered anymore. Nathaniel stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets, looking almost bored. "We already signed everything, Vivienne." His voice had been calm, businesslike, as if 13 years of marriage were nothing more than a contract reaching its expiration date. "You can't seriously be doing this." "I am." "That's all you have to say?" "What exactly do you want me to say?" Before I could answer, the front door opened. Vanessa Quinn stepped outside carrying a coffee mug. She smiled when she saw me. Not a guilty smile, not an uncomfortable smile, a victorious smile. Everything suddenly made sense. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the unexplained business trips, the emotional distance. The marriage had ended long before the divorce papers arrived. I just had not known it yet. Chapter 2. The numbers on the screen refused to make sense. I blinked once, then twice, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. $47 million. Not 47,000, not 470,000, 47 million. I stared at the monitor so long that the digits began to blur together. "There has to be some mistake," I finally whispered. Harold Mercer remained silent for a moment. Then he gently folded his hands on the desk. I understand why you'd think that. I don't think that, I know that. My voice sounded strange even to me. My father had spent his life fixing broken pipes and repairing air conditioners. He drove a pickup truck that rattled every time it started. He clipped coupons. He wore work boots until the soles practically disappeared. Men like that did not leave behind $47 million. I pointed toward the screen. Please check again. Harold nodded. Without argument, without judgment, he entered information into the system. Several long seconds passed. Then he checked another database, then another. The silence felt endless. Finally, he looked up. The amount is correct. My stomach tightened. No, it is. No, it can't be. He turned the screen towards himself again and repeated the verification process. I watched every movement, every keystroke, every confirmation window. At the end, he exhaled slowly. The amount is still the same. I laughed, not because anything was funny, because my brain had completely stopped functioning. Then you've got the wrong person. Harold shook his head. We verified your identification 3 times. My father wasn't rich. I understand. You don't. The words escaped before I could stop them. I rubbed my forehead. I'm sorry. No apology necessary. For the first time, his expression softened. I imagine this is overwhelming. Overwhelming wasn't the word. A tornado was overwhelming. Getting divorced was overwhelming. Being thrown out of your home was overwhelming. Finding out your father secretly left behind $47 million felt more like reality had broken apart. Harold opened a digital file. Perhaps it would help if I explained where the funds originated. Chapter 2. The numbers on the screen refused to make sense. I blinked once, then twice, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. $47 million. Not 47,000, not 470,000, 47 million. I stared at the monitor so long that the digits began to blur together. There has to be some mistake, I finally whispered. Harold Mercer remained silent for a moment. Then he gently folded his hands on the desk. I understand why you'd think that. I don't think that, I know that. My voice sounded strange even to me. My father had spent his life fixing broken pipes and repairing air conditioners. He drove a pickup truck that rattled every time it started. He clipped coupons. He wore work boots until the soles practically disappeared. Men like that did not leave behind $47 million. I pointed toward the screen. Please check again. Harold nodded. Without argument, without judgment, he entered information into the system. Several long seconds passed. Then he checked another database, then another. The silence felt endless. Finally, he looked up. The amount is correct. My stomach tightened. No, it is. No, it can't be. He turned the screen towards himself again and repeated the verification process. I watched every movement, every keystroke, every confirmation window. At the end, he exhaled slowly. The amount is still the same. I laughed, not because anything was funny, because my brain had completely stopped functioning. Then you've got the wrong person. Harold shook his head. We verified your identification 3 times. My father wasn't rich. I understand. You don't. The words escaped before I could stop them. I rubbed my forehead. I'm sorry. No apology necessary. For the first time, his expression softened. I imagine this is overwhelming. Overwhelming wasn't the word. A tornado was overwhelming. Getting divorced was overwhelming. Being thrown out of your home was overwhelming. Finding out your father secretly left behind $47 million felt more like reality had broken apart. Harold opened a digital file. Perhaps it would help if I explained where the funds originated. I nodded slowly, because I desperately needed an explanation. Anything, a reason, a story, something that made sense. He clicked through several documents. The account was established through a trust structure more than 20 years ago. I leaned forward. My father created it? Indirectly. He opened another page. A scanned contract appeared. The document looked old. The signatures were faded. The story begins in 2003. I stared at the screen. Harold continued, "Your father inherited a small parcel of land on the edge of a commercial development zone." I frowned. My father owned land? Yes. I never knew that. Very few people did. That sounded exactly like Everett Ashford. If he had won the lottery, he probably would have hidden the ticket in a toolbox and never mentioned it. Harold continued, "A development company approached him with an offer. To buy the property? Correct." I nodded. That part sounded normal. What happened? Your father declined the traditional purchase agreement. I blinked. He turned down the money? Not entirely. Harold smiled slightly. He negotiated something unusual. I stared at him. What kind of agreement? A profit participation arrangement. The words meant nothing to me. Harold noticed my confusion. Instead of accepting a single payment, he retained a 5% interest in future profits generated from the project. I sat motionless. He kept ownership? Not ownership. He pointed toward the contract. He retained a percentage of earnings. My mind struggled to keep up. And that worked? It worked extremely well. He opened another file. Photographs filled the screen. Glass towers, restaurants, office buildings, retail spaces, parking structures, entire city blocks. I stared at the images. What is all this? The development built on that land. The answer barely registered. The project looked enormous, far beyond anything I had imagined. Harold clicked through revenue statements, year after year, growth after growth, expansion after expansion. The numbers became ridiculous. Millions, then tens of millions, then more. My father's 5% share accumulated quietly in the background while the development expanded across 2 decades. I felt dizzy. All those years, while I worried about rent, while I worked part-time jobs, while I struggled through college, while I watched my father repair other people's homes. The money had existed, waiting, growing, hidden, protected. For me, a painful thought entered my mind. Why didn't he tell me? Harold remained quiet. I can't answer that. I looked away. The answer probably died with my father. Yet memories began surfacing. I remembered him refusing to replace his old truck, even when he could afford something newer. I remembered him repairing a widow's furnace for free during one of the coldest winters our town had seen. I remembered him slipping grocery money into a neighbor's mailbox and pretending he knew nothing about it afterward. Back then, I thought he was simply generous. Now I wonder if he understood something about money that most people never learned. Maybe wealth was never the goal. Maybe freedom was. Maybe security was. Maybe he wanted me to discover that lesson on my own. Harold quietly closed one file and opened another. His expression changed, only slightly, but enough for me to notice. "What is it?" He hesitated, then turned the monitor towards himself. "There's something else." My pulse immediately accelerated. "What kind of something else?" He studied the screen. There was an inquiry. My stomach tightened again. "What does that mean?" "Someone attempted to obtain information regarding the account." "When?" He checked the date. "Late last year." The room suddenly felt colder. What happened? "The request was denied." "Why?" "The individual lacked authorization." I stared at him. "Who was it?" Harold slowly shook his head. "I can't disclose that." Frustration rushed through me. "Then how is that helpful?" His expression remained calm. "I can tell you this. The inquiry triggered additional security measures." My thoughts immediately began racing. Late last year. Late last year. Something about the timing felt wrong, familiar, uncomfortable. Then the memory surfaced. Late last year was when Nathaniel started acting differently. Late last year was when he became secretive. Late last year was when unexplained meetings appeared on his calendar. Late last year was when the distance between us suddenly grew wider. I slowly looked back at Harold. My mouth felt dry. Outside the office window, people continued walking through the bank lobby as if nothing had changed, as if the world were still normal.
But my world wasn't normal, because for the first time, a question entered my mind that I could not ignore. What if Nathaniel knew something before he ever asked me for a divorce?
Chapter 3. A week earlier, I would have dismissed the idea as paranoia. Now I wasn't so sure. I left the bank carrying a folder thick enough to change my life and a headache that refused to go away. $47 million sat inside a trust account bearing my name, yet the only thing I could think about was Nathaniel. If someone had tried to access information about that account months before our divorce, the timing was too convenient to ignore. By the next morning, I was sitting across from Eleanor Reed. Her office overlooked downtown Columbus. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed rows of glass buildings glowing beneath gray spring clouds. The room smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Eleanor read through the documents Harold Mercer had given me without interrupting. When she finally looked up, her expression was calm. "You did the right thing coming here." "So I'm not crazy?" She smiled slightly. "Not yet." That earned the first laugh I'd had in days. Then she became serious again. "Tell me everything." I did. The divorce, the motel, the account, the security inquiry, Nathaniel, every detail. For nearly an hour, Eleanor listened while making notes. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair. "If someone investigated this trust before your divorce, we need to know who and why. Can you find out?" "I can try." She opened a folder on her desk. "I work with specialists when financial matters become complicated." Specialists? A forensic accountant, a financial investigator, a real estate records analyst. That sounded expensive. My face must have shown it. Eleanor noticed immediately. "You can afford it." I almost laughed again. My brain still refused to accept that sentence. Before leaving, she gave me a business card. "If anyone contacts you about the trust, don't answer questions." "What about Nathaniel?" Her eyes narrowed. "Especially Nathaniel." 3 days later, she called. Her voice sounded different, focused, sharp. "Can you come in? Did you find something?" "Yes." My pulse quickened. An hour later, I was back in her office. Several documents covered the conference table. Eleanor slid one toward me. "Recognize this company?" The name belonged to a private investigative firm. I frowned. "No." "It was hired 8 months ago." "By who?" She met my eyes. "Nathaniel Crow." For a moment, the room went silent. I stared at her, then at the paper, then back again. "No." "I am afraid so." A knot formed in my stomach. What were they investigating? She handed me another document. The answer was already highlighted. Everett Ashford, my father. I couldn't breathe. He investigated my father? Yes. The next page contained additional records: property searches, land records, historical contracts, development permits, my father's old property, the land connected to the trust. Nathaniel had followed every breadcrumb he could find. I felt sick. Eleanor watched me carefully. He knew something, but not what. Exactly. I sat down heavily. The forensic accountant, a quiet man named Daniel Foster, pointed toward one of the reports. "We found no indication he located the trust itself." "What did he find?" "The land." Daniel tapped another page. "The profit participation agreement." I remembered Harold explaining it. 5%, 20 years, millions accumulating silently. Daniel continued. "He knew money existed somewhere." "How much?" "We don't believe he knew." "And the account?" "No evidence he ever found it." I looked at Eleanor. "Then why divorce me?" Neither of them answered immediately. That scared me more than any response could have. Finally, Eleanor folded her arms. "Because he couldn't legally touch the trust." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means the account belonged only to you." "Okay." "He couldn't claim it in divorce court." The realization arrived slowly, painfully, like a knife sliding between ribs. Eleanor continued. "If Nathaniel believed substantial assets existed but couldn't access them directly, he needed another strategy." I swallowed hard. "What strategy?" Her answer came quietly. "Leave you desperate." The words hung in the air. Nobody spoke, nobody needed to. Suddenly, every piece began fitting together. The rushed divorce, the pressure, the settlement, the way he fought over every dollar. the way he insisted on keeping the house, the way he stripped my life down to almost nothing. Daniel broke the silence. If you eventually discovered the money while isolated and vulnerable, he thought I'd depend on him. Eleanor nodded. Or voluntarily share it. Anger flooded through me, hot, immediate. For years, I believed Nathaniel simply stopped loving me. That hurt enough. Learning he might have calculated everything was worse, far worse. A few days later, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed Miranda, my older sister. We hadn't spoken much since Dad's funeral. I answered anyway. Hello? At first, her voice sounded cautious, almost friendly. I heard about the account. Of course she had. News traveled fast, especially bad news, and apparently very good news. How? A pause. People talk. I closed my eyes. What do you want, Miranda? Another pause. Then came the real reason for the call. Dad never told me anything. There was nothing to tell. Apparently there was. I rubbed my forehead. Miranda. No. Her voice sharpened. No, Vivienne, don't do that. Do what? Act surprised. I felt my patience slipping. You think Dad planned this? I think he loved you more. The accusation hit harder than I expected. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I answered. That's not true. Then why did you get everything? I had no answer, because I honestly didn't know. The conversation ended badly. The next day, things became worse. Emails arrived from relatives I barely remembered, old neighbors, former classmates, a cousin in Arizona, an aunt in Michigan. Everyone suddenly wanted to reconnect. Some wanted help, some wanted advice, some wanted money. One message simply read, "Congratulations," followed by a bank account number. I laughed when I saw it. Then I nearly cried, because the hardest part wasn't knowing who wanted money. It was wondering who genuinely cared about me. That evening, another message appeared. Unknown number. Only one sentence. We need to talk. Nathaniel. I ignored it. Then another arrived. And another. By midnight, there were 6. The following afternoon, I returned to my motel. A black sedan sat near the entrance. My stomach tightened immediately. The driver door opened. Nathaniel stepped out. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he smiled. The same smile he used during business meetings. The same smile he used whenever he wanted something. Vivienne. My heart began pounding. What are you doing here? We should talk. No. His smile faded. This affects both of us. I stared at him. The trust belongs to me. He took a slow step forward. His eyes never left mine. You really think that's the whole story? The confidence in his voice chilled me more than the question itself, because suddenly I wasn't sure how much he actually knew. Chapter 4. His expression reminded me of a poker player holding a winning hand. For 13 years, I had watched Nathaniel Crowe negotiate contracts, pressure investors, and talk competitors into bad decisions. He always carried himself the same way, calm, certain, completely convinced he was the smartest person in the room. Standing outside that motel, I saw something different for the first time. A crack, small, almost invisible, but there. What story are you talking about? I asked. Nathaniel glanced toward the parking lot before looking back at me. We shouldn't discuss this outside. Then we shouldn't discuss it at all. His jaw tightened. Vivienne. No. I folded my arms. You threw me out of our house. You agreed to the settlement. You made sure I had no choice. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then something unexpected happened. Nathaniel sighed, actually sighed. The arrogant confidence disappeared for a second. I made mistakes. I almost laughed. Mistakes? Yes. You cheated on me. His eyes shifted. Vivienne, you lied for years. I'm trying to have a conversation. You ended our marriage. His shoulders dropped slightly. The performance looked convincing. Maybe it would have worked a month earlier. Not now. Not after the bank. Not after Eleanor. Not after discovering he had secretly investigated my father.
I know about the private investigator. The color drained from his face, only for an instant, but I saw it. His recovery came quickly, too quickly. What investigator? I smiled for the first time. It wasn't a pleasant smile. The one you hired. Silence. Then another sigh. Different this time. Less confident. More careful. You don't understand what happened. I understand enough. No. His voice softened. I was trying to protect us. The excuse was so ridiculous that I stared at him in disbelief. Protect us? There were risks. What risks? I couldn't be sure who else knew. I felt my pulse accelerating. What exactly did you know? Nathaniel hesitated. That hesitation told me more than any answer. He knew something. Not everything, but enough. His eyes searched my face. Let's meet somewhere tomorrow. No, I can explain. You've had years to explain. I turned toward the motel entrance. Behind me, I heard his voice. You're making a mistake. I stopped walking, slowly turned around. Nathaniel looked older than he had a week earlier, more tired, more nervous, more desperate. For the first time since our divorce, he wasn't speaking like a man in control, and that realization felt surprisingly satisfying. The power had shifted. He knew it, I knew it, we both stood there pretending otherwise. The next morning, I met Eleanor again. This time, her conference table was covered in financial reports, stacks of documents, spreadsheets, property records, loan agreements. The sight reminded me of a criminal investigation more than a legal consultation. Eleanor handed me a cup of coffee. You look exhausted. I ran into Nathaniel. That immediately got her attention. What happened? I told her everything, every word, every reaction, every strange answer. When I finished, she nodded slowly. He's scared. The statement surprised me. He didn't look scared. He contacted you personally. So? He never does anything personally. That was true. Nathaniel preferred assistants, lawyers, managers, intermediaries. Direct involvement only happened when something mattered. Something mattered now. Daniel Foster entered, carrying another folder. His expression looked unusually serious. More financial records? Eleanor asked. Daniel nodded. Much more. He opened the folder. Several pages slid across the table. I recognized Nathaniel's company logo, Crow Development Group, the business that had consumed most of our marriage, the company I helped build while sacrificing my own career. Daniel tapped a document. Unsecured loans. I looked down. The number made me blink. Then another. Then another. Millions. Several separate loans. Several lenders. Several maturity dates. What am I looking at? Daniel leaned forward. A company under pressure. My stomach tightened. How bad? Worse than it appears. Eleanor joined the conversation. Most successful businesses carry debt. Okay. This isn't normal debt. She pointed toward another page. Short-term obligations. Then another. Balloon payments. Then another. Renewals dependent on future revenue. I stared at the documents, slowly understanding. Nathaniel's empire looked strong from outside. Inside, it was fragile, dangerously fragile, like a house balanced on rotten beams. Daniel nodded toward the reports. If enough pressure hits the company simultaneously, everything could collapse. I looked up, meaning, Eleanor answered, you could destroy him. The room became silent. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The words hung in the air. Destroy him. Part of me immediately imagined it. Buying debt, forcing liquidation, watching him lose everything. The office, the luxury cars, the expensive house, the reputation, every symbol of power he spent years worshiping. For a few dangerous seconds, the fantasy felt wonderful. Then I thought about my father, Everett Ashford, the man who secretly accumulated wealth without allowing it to poison him, the man who fixed broken furnaces for strangers, the man who never measured people by money. I looked back at the documents, then pushed them away. No. Daniel looked surprised. No? I'm not doing that. Eleanor studied me carefully. You're certain? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Then nodded. Yes. Why? Because the answers suddenly seemed obvious. If I use this money only to hurt someone, then Nathaniel wins anyway. Neither attorney spoke. I continued. He spent years believing money was power. I glanced toward the financial reports. I'm not going to prove him right. For the first time since entering the office, Eleanor smiled. A genuine smile. Not professional, personal. That's probably the smartest decision you've made. I wasn't entirely convinced. Part of me still wanted revenge. Maybe that feeling will never disappear completely, but the decision felt right. The conversation shifted. Daniel opened another folder. This one was much thicker. Immediately, I noticed photographs, construction sites, buildings, inspection reports, engineering diagrams. What is this? Daniel exchanged a look with Eleanor. Neither seemed eager to answer, which meant I definitely wasn't going to like it. Finally, Eleanor spoke. We started reviewing Crow development projects. A chill moved through me. Why? Because some financial irregularities didn't make sense. Daniel handed me a photograph, a cracked support structure, then another, water damage, then another, unsafe electrical work. My stomach sank. What am I looking at? His answer came quietly. Evidence. I stared at the growing pile of documents and suddenly realized Nathaniel's problems might be far worse than debt.
Chapter 5. What followed over the next several weeks looked less like a business crisis and more like a controlled demolition. The first blow came from regulators, the second came from lenders, the third came from investors who suddenly realized the numbers they had trusted no longer matched reality. Every day brought another headline, another investigation, another request for documents, another lawsuit. Eleanor's team had assembled a mountain of evidence before forwarding everything through the proper legal channels. Engineering reports, inspection records, internal emails, financial disclosures, witness statements from former employees who finally felt safe enough to speak. The problems ran deeper than anyone expected. Corners had been cut, safety concerns had been ignored, defects had been hidden, buyers had been misled, and once investigators started pulling at the thread, the entire sweater began unraveling. One afternoon, I sat in Eleanor's office watching a news report play silently on a television mounted to the wall. Crow Development Group headquarters appeared on the screen. Reporters crowded outside. Employees carried boxes through revolving doors. A scrolling headline announced federal and state investigations. I barely recognized the company. For years, it had been Nathaniel's kingdom. Now it looked abandoned. Daniel Foster entered carrying another folder. He dropped it onto the conference table. Another lender called their loans. I stared at him. How many does that make? He gave a humorless laugh. I stopped counting. Eleanor shook her head. The cash flow can't survive this. For a strange moment, I felt almost sorry for Nathaniel. Almost. Then I remembered the motel, the $43, the years of manipulation, the lies, the betrayal. The sympathy disappeared. A week later, my phone rang unexpectedly. The caller ID displayed Vanessa Quinn. I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, she broke the silence. He's blaming everyone else. I leaned back in my chair. That doesn't surprise me. Another pause, then a tired sigh. I thought I knew him. I said nothing. There were always excuses. Her voice sounded different than before, smaller, less certain. He always had explanations. What changed? The investigators started showing up. I stared through the apartment window. Rain tapped softly against the glass. And suddenly every explanation sounded ridiculous. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then she said something I never expected. "I'm sorry." The words surprised me, not because they erased anything, they didn't, but because they sounded genuine. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she continued. "I just wanted you to know I'm sorry." The call ended shortly afterward. I never heard from her again. A month later, Nathaniel requested a meeting. Part of me wanted to refuse. Part of me wanted closure. Eventually, curiosity won. We met in a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town. When he walked through the door, I almost didn't recognize him. The expensive suits were gone. The confidence was gone. The certainty was gone. Even his posture looked different. He sat across from me and stared at his coffee for several seconds. Then he finally spoke. I made a mess of everything. I waited. For once, he wasn't performing. There was no sales pitch, no manipulation, no strategy, only exhaustion. "Vivienne," his voice cracked slightly, "I need help." There it was, the real reason for the meeting. I wasn't surprised. "I can't." "You could." "I won't." He lowered his eyes. For the first time since our divorce, I felt no anger, no bitterness, no desire for revenge, only distance, a chapter ending. "I would have helped you once," I said quietly. His shoulders tightened. "I know, but not anymore." The silence that followed felt strangely peaceful, not painful, not awkward, final. Eventually, Nathaniel nodded, as though he finally understood something he should have understood years earlier. We stood. He walked toward the exit. Halfway there, he stopped. Without turning around, he spoke one last time. "You were always the better person." Then he left, and somehow that was enough. The following year became one of rebuilding, not rebuilding a marriage, not rebuilding a company, rebuilding a life. The Second Chances Foundation started as an idea scribbled inside a notebook. Then it became an office, then a staff, then a mission. We helped women escaping financial abuse, women navigating divorce, women trying to start over after losing everything. Some needed temporary housing, some needed legal guidance, some simply needed someone to believe in them. Every success story reminded me of the woman sitting alone in a motel room with $43, the woman who thought her future was over. I also invested in affordable housing projects across central Ohio, not luxury developments, not vanity projects, places ordinary families could actually afford, places where working people could build stable lives, the kind of communities my father would have respected. A year after that, the Vivienne Ashford Scholarship officially launched. The first recipients gathered inside a small auditorium for the award ceremony. Students, dreamers, young people carrying burdens nobody else could see. As I watched them cross the stage, I found myself thinking about my father again. Not the money, not the trust, not the hidden fortune. The man, the lessons, the values, the example. Several months later, I visited his grave. The cemetery sat on a quiet hillside overlooking rolling fields painted gold by late afternoon sunlight. I stood there alone. No reporters, no lawyers, no investigators. Just me and him. For a long time, I said nothing. The wind moved gently through the trees. Birds called somewhere in the distance. The world felt peaceful. Finally, I smiled. Not because of $47 million, not because I had won, not because Nathaniel had lost, because I finally understood. My father never gave me wealth. He gave me something far more valuable: choice, dignity, responsibility, freedom. The money was only a tool. The real inheritance was the ability to decide who I wanted to become. As I turned and walked back toward my car, I realized Nathaniel would spend years living with the consequences of his own decisions. Miranda still had her own battles to fight. Everyone carried something. Everyone answered for something. As for me, I finally had what I had been searching for long before the trust account ever appeared: a life that belonged entirely to me. And before you go, I have one question. If you had the power to destroy the person who betrayed you, would you take revenge, or would you use that opportunity to build a better future for yourself and others? I'd love to hear your answer.